All righty. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, whenever you're going to be watching this. Hopefully, we've got a few people joining us for the live chat. We are joined for this is actually the third time Mr. Michael Wilson will be joining us. And to clarify, we're going to be covering something where we have not spoken about at all on his previous two uh, visits with us. And speaking of those previous two visits, if you want to know what he did in Rhodesia as well as in MACV-SOG, the two prior episodes are down in the description. Click those if you want to catch up on that, because we're going to be jumping in straight into what he was doing after SOG, after Rhodesia, and up until he retired. So I'm going to be learning a lot of stuff. I don't know much about any of what's coming today. So I'm going to be in y'all's book or in y'all's chair like usual and kind of learning and listening. So Mr. Mike, thank you for joining us on such short notice, and we're all ears. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. The Joint Military Commission and Joint Monitoring Mission took place in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan between 2002 and 2005. And the SPLM, the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement / Army, and the government of Sudan forces had battled to a standstill for 15 years. In the dry season, the government would come in with mechanized equipment there and all that, chase the insurgents up into the jungles, and as soon as the rainy season came, they'd be right back down and the cycle would begin all over again. And finally, both sides realized this was futile and doing nobody any good. And they appealed to the United States Department of State to broker a ceasefire arrangement, because there was already talk of a comprehensive peace agreement down the road a little bit. Anyway, there was a meeting in November of 2001, and from 13 to 19 January 2002, another meeting was held in Bergenstock, Switzerland. The whole thing was drawn up, and the signatories and participants determined. A few were added later, but initially it was a group called the Friends of the Nuba Mountains, consisting of the United States, the United Kingdom, Norway, Switzerland, Canada, Germany, Italy, France, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and I think one other came in eventually. I'm not sure. Eventually, it ended up with 12. But the thing was signed in January 2002, and in April it commenced operations, which is pretty good when you consider this was an operation that covered an area the size of Austria, and this was the most successful peacekeeping operation I've ever heard of in modern times. In over 3 years, not one person was killed. And the peace was maintained by an operational force of probably 15 or 20 guys total, the ones who actually got out in the bush. And this was done at a cost of $45 million. And just to put that in perspective, the UN's projected budget to replace this for the first year, this was for over 3 years. The UN's projected budget was $1 billion. And most of the cost was for air assets during the rainy season. And so they stood this thing up in April, and this is a case of the influence one strong leader can have. It was the thing was turned on by Brigadier General Jan Erik Willemsen, and the door was locked when he left by the same man. He ran the thing from start to finish, and he. As I say, this thing kept the peace in an area the size of Austria for over 3 years without one person being killed. What they did was essentially they broke the country down into areas. The first thing they did was disengagement, and the forces had to withdraw, and they set up demilitarized zones. And you have to understand the maps here were pretty sketchy. These things were only a kilometer wide in some places, kilometer wide. And nobody was quite sure where they were. And of course, Farmer Musa might not give a damn about it when he was trying to plow his field. The field his family plowed for 1,000 years. So anyway, it had its problems, and I have to say, this was done. It was a joint operation between the Sudanese People's Liberation Army on the ground. Well, let me get to the overall. It was actually chaired by the British ambassador. He always was the head of the overall mission, and Brigadier General Willemsen was the head of the Joint Monitoring Mission, based in Tilo and Kordofan province. So we worked these small teams. There were, for the most part, 5 sectors, with a sector commander and assistant, and then some other international monitors. No sector had 2 people from the same international monitors from the same nation there, just so we couldn't get any cliques or anything like that going. And the way this thing operated, it went out in teams with an international monitor, a representative, usually a junior officer of the government of Sudan Army, and a representative of the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, either an officer or a very senior warrant officer, an RSM. And there was a 4th one, usually in the truck. It was supposed to be a driver translator. He usually couldn't do either very well, so he was there. The thing called for, so we had him. The joint military mission was based in Tilo, and yeah, there's a picture of me. Now these were the heads of the government of Sudan police on my left, and the SPLA police on the right. And to give you an idea how keen these people were, they came to us before, when it became apparent there was going to be a comprehensive peace agreement. They said they wanted a head start. And we were the only ones who could transport one side to the others, into the other's territory. So we were a necessary part of all this. And this was a conference between the heads of the police in Kordofan province. If you got some more, if you got a few more shots, that'd be fine. If not, there's one for the ages. Anyway, this worked very well. And one time I remember somebody tried, okay, that was the team. That's me in the front. To my left is Rainer Baudendistel, and this guy was a UN translator and qualified in 5 different languages, and was great on higher level stuff, but he did not have a lot of patience for these village meetings. So that kind of devolved to me. The guy in the green shirt is an Irish veteran of the Royal Navy. He was our medic. The one in the middle is a major in the Italian Army. So, and the others are various factotum there. I don't think any of them is military, actually a military representative. Wow. And that picture, by the way, go back to that last one.
The
one I was back to the last shot there.
Yeah.
The last shot you just did. Can you bring that up again?
Yes, sir. My bad. Taking a minute with some technical. There we go.
Okay. That picture I'm holding is the cheerleading dance troupe of Michigan State University, which became very popular. We have some friends in Michigan, and I was an alumnus of Michigan State. And their daughter was on it. So we had a signed, autographed picture of this thing here in the middle of nowhere in Sudan. So, okay.
That's too cool.
And we had various operations we had to fulfill. One of them was making sure people were where they were meant to be, that there was no migration, and that we also had to monitor the status of arms, They were allowed to have small arms, but in very limited quantities. And I never got too deeply into that. I figured, when they saw the trucks coming, they could take anything they didn't want us to see out in the bush and hide it till we left. What I did get involved with was these village meetings. And anytime there was a flare up in our area, the first one I did, there was some abuses by a very rare instance of abuse by the government police. And these guys, if you want to see community-based policing in action, you needed to go there. These guys were out there in these little outposts. The only comms they had was to ride a bicycle if they could, sometimes 20 miles to the district headquarters where they had a radio. And these guys had it. And meanwhile, a K or two away off in the bush is a company of the other guys. I thought they did a fantastic job. I really did, but they got a little bit abusive in the village of Rhodesia. And that was my first instance in dealing with this stuff. I went up there and give you an idea how they worked. The provincial police superintendent or commissioner, a very high-ranking officer, went, some high-ranking government officials, and they sorted the whole mess out in an hour or two. They relieved the local police chief, who these guys have been messing with the local women, and then they grabbed this hand-operated grain mill that they had. That was returned. The chief and the assistant chief were relieved on the spot, and I had to go back there a number of times just for follow-ups. I love going out there. It was kind of a rough trip through the bush, but it was one little guy, one cocky little, wiry little SPLM guy named Musa, and I wouldn't have a meeting unless they went out to the field and got him, because I always knew what the rest of the story was going to be. And these village meetings, you tend to think of America, where if you have a town meeting, if you got 51%, you won. There you were wasting your time with 51%. If you could not get at least 75, 80% consensus, you had failed. And the idea was to get total consensus. And that means sitting there in some hot weather. Don't drink too much coffee beforehand, because you weren't going to get up and go anywhere while this was going on. And everybody, that dickhead back in the fourth row had to be heard a couple of times, or someone's going to shut one of these guys up. It had to be them, not us. And we did a pretty good job, actually, to the point where they were going to start the war up again in a day or so. And we had another instance in the area where a returning civilian who bug out to Khartoum when the war started came back and wanted a building that had been taken over by the government police. You had a bunch of the young Turks, and the problem was never the people who'd been in the war. You weren't going to go down to the local equivalent of the American Legion and get any support for starting this war up again. It was all the young Turks who had missed it. Just as we had guys in Rhodesia, young Americans who missed the Vietnam War because they were too young, showed up there. It was the only war available. You had the same mentality among some of these young guys out in the bush there. So the structure of the SPLA, they were gangs, really. And the leaders they'd give them all the rank you want, but they were just very charismatic and effective gang leaders. And when he tried to put the whole comprehensive peace agreement together and start throwing these guys into conventional, phase them into government military units, I think they kind of suffered because they did not have the detailed professional background. But they did a good job of what they did through the war. And I found some of the government army personnel to be really good. The province senior military officer, Brigadier Mohammed, about every other person over there was named Mohammed, was a very good officer. We had a couple bad ones, and he dealt with them. We didn't have to. with a couple of bad government officers. So anyway, and the Nuba is a mixed bag of Muslims, uh, Christians, and animists. People worship whatever out there. And it's not unknown for one family to have one son who's a Muslim, one who's a Christian, and one who's an animist, and which is, you don't even think of that. You think of the rigid rules of Islam and all that this could never be, but it was. And they did not like, nobody, to include the Muslims, wanted anything to do with Sharia. This is the traditional Islamic law where you stone adulterers and throw homosexuals off of roofs and
Hands cut off.
Thieves. And just, if somebody chops your right hand off, it's either a death by starvation, or you have to have somebody to reach into the communal pot, get the food out for you, because you cannot reach into the communal pot with your left hand. Anyway, nobody wanted that. There were very little imprisonment. You really had to be a bad hombre to get locked up. And the reason being, they weren't so much interested in punishment as they were restitution. This is an area where, finances are measured in chickens and goats, and serious affluence is owning a camel. So, they're poor, but nobody told them so they never realized it, never acted that way. They were very proud, hard-working people. All of them of all religious persuasions. So it had a pretty good potential for success. Unfortunately, at the end, we'll get to that in a minute, the UN came in, and that's, you want to screw up the order of march with one truck convoy, get the UN in there to do it. But we'll get to that momentarily. Probably some people have some questions about it. Let me just take a little sidebar here. Darfur was going on at the same time, but it was about 400 miles from us. And those are 400 very difficult miles to drive. I mean, it was something like, think more in terms of Boston and Dallas or something as far as getting there, if you didn't get blown up by a landmine, So, and the thing with Darfur was that it was the hub for the Chinese oil people. There was oil fields just south of it, and this is where Darfur was, where they organized the exploitation of the oil. And the thing that touched all the trouble off there, people kept ambushing these vehicular columns. So the government decided they wanted, I think, a 10K no fire zone, cordon sanitaire on each side of the main highway there. And there were all the war crimes you could ever want or need, but it was not textbook, what the hell's the word I'm looking for? Genocide. It was not delivered against nobody. The government didn't care what your religion was. Like I say, they were a mixed bag. They wanted you out of there, and if you didn't get out, they were going to bomb your village. That's simple. And if they saw you in there, they'd strafe you with a gunship or something if you're trying to go to market or something. So in that sense, it was not genocide, but there were all the war crimes. It was a horrible thing. And I don't think anybody ever really had to answer for it, because when the whole thing, wrapped up, everybody said, I just leave well enough alone. Anyway, do you have any questions? Is there any questions up to this so far?
There's actually a site that's got a lot of your photos and some of your sit reps, and I've been going through some, and I've got some photos I can pull up. But we've actually got a South African joining us watching. Glad to have you watching. I saw where several things, and you can pick if you'd like to talk about it, but I saw on one of the things that mentioned Darfur and the AIDS outbreak that y'all were worried about it becoming an issue in the Sudan, and it really never made its way down there. Either y'all kept everything sanitary up to date and all of that, or it just didn't spread. And then I believe it mentioned something about a bright light rescue to where you were potentially waiting to go see if there was a downed aircraft that you needed to go
There
check.
was a downed aircraft. We had these Yuki pilots, and the chopper pilots were pretty good. The fixed wing pilots did not have a particularly good record, and certainly not for safety. And there were several crashes, and I did not actually go in on it. And it wasn't a bright light in the way you might have to shoot your way in and shoot your way out. It was just going. It was, in a sense, they're going in for a downed aircraft, and I actually got to fly MI8 or MI17, whatever designation they were. And these UK pilots, they didn't give a damn. I told them I got a little bit of seat time, and I talked about a very little bit in Vietnam. They said, yeah, sure, yeah, sure, get in there. And I got to fly these things a little bit. If it wasn't too hot, we weren't too heavily loaded and all that. And so like I said, the chopper pilots were pretty good as far as I could see. And the fixed wing pilots are scary, I mean, they had no safety procedures. Just cargo just thrown in there, nothing secured, people sitting on top of the cargo. And so if anything happened, you got to have stuff sailing every which way, knocking, just destroying the trim of the aircraft and all that. So, but yeah. So that takes care of that bright light operation. Nigel Wilson went in on that, I believe.
Oh wow! Was everything all right? Were there survivors?
No, I think there were some people killed. I mean, it was not just something we're pancaked down. I don't remember the exact status of casualties, but I believe there were some KIA in that thing. So
terrible. I thought it was interesting you talking about all the walking, and I believe one of your little letters here that says, for those who may someday come to Sudan and have occasional to travel by foot with these quite prodigious walkers, here are some definitions of Sudanese walking distance descriptions. Right here, a mile or less. Very close, 1 to 3 miles. Not too far, 3 to 5 miles of walking.
And these people, they were stepping out too. That because there were there were a few raggedy old 50-year-old trucks running around, and when he stopped, somebody had to jump down and put rocks in front of the wheels because they had no brakes or anything. And they had to stop them on a bit of a slope so they could roll them to get them started again. And these things were loaded with cargo and humanity like you wouldn't believe. Now, the one thing was they couldn't go very fast because these roads over there, I mean, national roads, were a respectable farmer wouldn't own it for a farmland. And you had the rainy season where you just didn't get around by road for a couple of months there. And even when things going in and coming out, you had to be a pretty good off-road driver to get through this stuff. We use these Toyota Hilux pickups, and these things, I'm not too much of a fan of these Nagasaki nut buckets, but these things were incredibly tough. They had a little 4-cylinder diesel in them, and guys tried to kill them and could not. They had oversized tires on them. There were no radios in the country because nobody could fix them or replace them or anything. So everything was bias ply tube tires, and every truck had a winch on it and a jack and the usual stuff. You'd have mats and all that to get you out of if you got stuck. But driving out there could be an adventure.
I mean, I can't. I mean, I thought Rhodesia was bad, hearing all the walking and crazy stuff y'all are doing, but from the sound and some of these sit reps, I mean, you did quite a bit of walking.
Oh yes.
I was also curious with you doing all of this walking. Well, not only with just walking, but with you being a peacekeeper or whatever the term may be, were you allowed to carry personal protection, or were
Oh,
you?
no.
No.
And we had a couple instances. Regifi wasn't too bad. Well, we went in another village called Karkaraya, the one where the police had taken over this building and this guy wanted it back. And you walk into a place with, 20 or 30 young Turks with cocked and locked AK-47s. You don't have anything. It brings out your communication skills, your persuasive skills. So, and we resolved that situation. It's too long a story to go into here, but the thing worked out very effectively. It was common sense. We got a solution. It worked. It didn't quite fit the rules and regulations, but I contacted General Williamson. I said, sir, we did. The local schoolmaster talked to his student, to the families, and they got enough space, for a replacement cop shop. I says, not within a 400-meter radius it's supposed to be, but I think we better just declare victory, police up the barbed wire, and get the hell out of here while we can. He said, absolutely, tell them I'll be up there tomorrow to sign everything and bless it. So, sometimes you do what you have to do.
I mean, that is this sounds like it had the potentiality of jumping off and getting out of hand real quick at any given time.
When we came in there, they said if the police weren't gone from the town by 5:00 that afternoon, they're going to start the war up again. And this again, two of the local cops got on their bicycles and walked the road and pushed them where they had to, down to Umsadiba, where we were located, to say, hey, you better get up there just as quick as you can. And we had another instance where one of the battalion commanders, he had some problems. He had two tribal groups within his command. And we could do a whole section on tribalism and the impact it has on the third world. If you don't understand it, you're preordained to failure dealing there. But anyway, these two groups, one of them felt that the other was getting more promotions than the other was. Now you thinking, yeah, there's money involved. There's no money involved. They didn't pay these SPLA guys. They got some mealy meal every day, and that was about it. That was their pay. But the government intel people had used it. They gave them, these guys had G3s and AKs, which were the most rugged, indestructible weapons you could think of. And they gave them a case of 7.62 by 39 and a case of 7.62 by 51, which is just enough to get you killed. And went after Cuckoo Jazz, who was this battalion commander, in his headquarters with his family there. And somebody got the word back to the Commander Ibrahim, who was the SPLA commander for the area, essentially colonel, brigadier, or something like that in their TO&E. And he got a hold of us and said, you better get down there. There's some kind of a mutiny going on. And we didn't give a damn about that. That was internal business. But they were very close to the GOS area, and it was a pretty major area. And the last thing we needed was for this thing to, get chasing one another across the DMZ or even into it. And we had this one guy he was the sector commander. Reiner was he was married to an Ethiopian woman with some family problems. He was gone for a little bit. And then we had this dipstick from New Zealand, and he was going to go do weapons checks somewhere. I got on the phone to Tilo and said, hey, this is a situation. What do you think we're going to do? Say, you can get the hell down there just as fast as you can. That was another situation. Yeah, something going on when you see 30, 40 guys. They weren't supposed to have more than, I think, a handful of people armed together at any one time. When you got 30 or 40 of them wandering around with their AKs on their shoulders.
Bad
Yeah,
news.
something's going down here. So talk to this battalion commander and made it clear, what you do to these guys, this is your problem. This is an internal SPLA matter. We're not going to get involved. But the day you even think about crossing, either going into that DMZ or certainly crossing it, now we have a problem with you. He said, no problem, Michael. He said, we'll keep it internal, And they did. I don't know whatever happened to these guys. I know we were on our way back. We saw a few of them up the road, and they were quite worried about the continued existence. So, because these commanders were not people that you think of a mafia capo or a MS-13 gang leader or something. You didn't cross. You don't go in there and shoot up their compound where they live with their family in there and expect to have a long life if there was anything to be done about it. And like I say, this was done. The government intel people, they were a little bit sneaky, and they deliberately gave them just enough ammo, to get them in trouble. Throw some darts at Superman here, and then they were on their own. So anyway, that was just another instance. But the one in Carcaraya, I mean, these when you got out into the SPLA areas, SPLM controlled areas, these very few of the people were actually Muslims. And there was plenty of booze out there, and there was plenty of drinking. And this one was causing the trouble. He'd gone about 15 years before to Khartoum when the war started in the area. And he came back, and this building had been passed from the army to the special police to the local police. Like I say, were just paragons of good community policing. And he wanted this building back, and it was like a 10 by 10 or 12 by 12. Essentially mud brick building with a tin roof on it, but it was about the most sophisticated building in the village, and he wanted it back, and he got all these young Turks, SPLA guys stirred up, and by the time he showed up there at 11 o'clock, he was 3 sheets to the wind, and he and I exchanged. I mean, these things are not always tact and diplomacy. Sometimes you got to tell people where the eagle shit in the buckwheat. And the result of this was that by the next day, they had a full platoon of heavily armed GOS police in the area, which they had not had. I mean, these guys were unarmed. It was like the British bobbies. These guys carried out their duties unarmed out there. So, but all of a sudden, they had a whole basic load of them in there. And I said, how much longer are you going to listen to this guy? And there was this gooch-eyed SPLA, just I think probably outside Marxist agitator in the area. And I sent word. We had one of our SPLA officers, Captain Cody, very good young officer. And he was the area intel guy. We know it. He got used to the phones, the vehicles. We did a lot of back channel stuff to keep the peace there. If somebody running down and talking to so-and-so could make a problem go away, we did it without a lot of fanfare. And so anyway, I said, listen, you get in your truck. You go down and see Commander Ibrahim and tell him that I said if there's some way it could be, if this guy could go out to shit in the night and never come back, that would not be a bad thing. So, but he was, he was there afterwards, but he was much quieter, much less strident. It was not a good thing. This Commander Ibrahim, this Rainer Bowdendies, though, had never been in the military. He'd been in the diplomatic services and very, very good at high level stuff there. But anyway, we went down to see Commander Ibrahim, who had all his subordinate unit leaders there, commanders, and his staff there, and started telling them there was some guy showed up in Diba with a weapon, some high ranking SPLA guy. And it was making, and Ryder goes out and started telling him what Abraham was going to have to do. You don't lock somebody's heels in front of all the subordinates. And I got in there. I said, "Excuse me, Ryder, shut up." I spoke to him in German or something. And, so anyway, I said, "Commander Abraham, listen, this guy is making both you and us look bad. He's right in our backyard, flaunting all this stuff, and the fact and is doing it makes it look as though you don't control your sector." So anyway, we chatted for a few minutes more, and everything settled down, and the problem was very speedily taken care of. This guy was packed off to the higher headquarters from which he'd come. He was home on leave or something, and we were about to leave. Abraham came up. He said, "Michael, you were in special forces, weren't you?" I said, "Yes, I was." So it was the sort of stuff you learn to do anyway. So, but it was, as you can see, this was not a rigid. There were no rigid protocols. You did what you had to do to maintain the peace. And when you're stretched that thin, we're talking about 15 or 20 guys from 5 headquarters trying to cover an area the size of Austria. You had better know what to do and be able to implement it. And the only bunch there was there, I have to say it, most of the other international people, most of them were military. And America, the State Department hired Pacific Architects and Engineers Government Division, and they hired all the American international monitors, such as myself, and they also did all the logistics for the entire project. They took care of that through a subsidiary company. But so that was how that. Most of these guys, a lot of them were sent by their war departments and all the Ministry of War of their countries from which they came. And I got to know the number of guys from the Guards Division and all this. And of course, in Rhodesia, I learned British drill. In fact, when we closed it down, Major Nick Burrows, ex-para and ex-Coldstream Guard, and I were the ones that took the flag down. So anyway, so
the countries you mentioned earlier, the UK, Germany, I think you said maybe the Netherlands, and a whole host of other nations.
Yeah.
They and unlike the US, who sent non-active duty military, they actually
these were active duty. They were active duty military
from the other countries. You mean? Yeah,
but not the United States. They wanted this 6 degrees of separation. So if we got into some kind of trouble, it wouldn't
plausible deniability. Somewhat.
It would be PA&E's problem. So but most of these people were military. And the way it was set up, the commander from start to finish was Brigadier General Willemsen, and the Chief of Staff / 2IC was always a British full colonel.
Oh.
And the operations officer was always a Swede, lieutenant colonel. And this was just the way the TONE was set up. And most of them were pretty good. The only ones who did not feature too well were the Dutch. And they were not too well liked and not too well respected. And the other thing, the overall head of the thing, of the Joint Military Commission, was the British ambassador to Sudan.
Oh, okay.
So he was the titular civilian head of the whole thing. So what we did was actually the Joint Monitoring Mission.
So he was effectively, besides your direct military boss that were with the Brits or whoever, that ambassador was your head honcho.
It's almost like a country mission, where the military attaché comes under the ambassador. It's that, just like that, very similar. So,
wow, that had to be neat, getting to mix with I'm sure the guys were, since they were active duty, quite a bit younger than you, getting it. Not that you were old. I mean, you were still out in fighting
Yeah,
condition,
I
but
was I was 63 when I got there, and one guy showed one of the clock.
damn,
I was 64 when we wrapped it up in 2005, and this guy was 66 when he got there. So I wasn't the oldest, and there were no kids there. I mean, most of these guys were. That guy is one of our driver, translator, mechanics. Very good guy. He really was, and he kind of ran the motor pool, made sure the generators were working and all that. I think he was a Kenyan actually. He wasn't Sudanese. I believe he was Kenyan if I remember.
you look in good shape and mighty dang healthy for 60, 62 years old at that point in time. Hey,
63, yeah,
63.
63. Yeah.
That's
I
mm,
was actually. So the only thing is my knees that had to be replaced a few years later were
well,
getting to their last legs. But
I was about to say, with
good
all your
enough.
parachute jumps, it was that I'm surprised you hadn't had knee replaced before then.
I'll tell you all about judo and what it can do to ACLs. Anyway, as long as you like that judo stuff. Anyway, yeah, and now come the end of this thing, we were to be replaced by the UN,
Yeah.
and if I cannot come up with terms derogatory enough to
Mm,
express my contempt for the UN at every level.
yeah.
These people came in, pissed away $1 billion a year to do what we'd done for over 3 years for 45 million. Give you an idea how they were a bunch of self-serving bureaucrats. The only ones that weren't total oxygen thieves were the demining people,
Oh,
and they weren't too bad. But even there, it could have been better done, by other people, really. And NGOs, they did a lot of good, but they were, just before we get on to the UN, these non-governmental organizations, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders and all that. Some of them did some good stuff, but most of them were we had problems because they were so anti-military in our attitudes. In fact, they were going to fire a couple of the girls. One of them hurt her ankle really badly. It was blown up, looked like she had a softball stuck in it. And they had to wheel her on dirt roads on a bicycle 10 miles to get to a place where she could make comms with us. And she wanted to know if we could give her a ride up to their headquarters, which is up at the top of this mountain. It was another 10 miles or 15 miles and up on the top of a very tedious mountain to climb. And he said, don't even worry about it. We got a chopper going up there. And she and this other girl, never been in a chopper before, got a ride up there. Well, the head of the Doctors Without Frontiers found out it was going to fire her. He didn't like JMC because we had military in our name, even though we were an effective peacekeeping operation, supported them. And they were going to fire these two girls for riding in our helicopter. But anyway, when they're too crippled, one of them was too crippled to walk up there. So anyway,
God.
and a lot of these women that came out there with these NGOs, it was kind of, it was supposedly a sign when in the first Gulf War, when they were going back to the States, when they're redeploying back to the States, there's a sign over the embarkation portal there that said, when you pass through this gate, you'll be ugly again. And a lot of these women had a very puffed up notion of themselves. When you got a handful of women and a few hundred guys around, you can be flattered probably way beyond what you deserve.
Goddesses then.
Anyway, it came time the UN was going to replace us. So the first thing, well, there could be every operation, every place they had to go, they had to have two means of transportation because no JMC, according to UN rules, could ride in UN vehicles or aircraft, and no UN personnel could ride in our transportation. Yeah, you see where this is going. They came in there, and we had some of these people come in, and some of the people weren't too bad. the first deputation we had found talked to some of the guys who were attached to it, military guys from other armies. And when the serious one came in, their head of mission to be, and their military chief came in, he was from Sri Lanka. And the first thing, he just left the rest of them. He left their head of mission to talk to Rainer Baudendistel, and he found me. And we spent the whole time that they were talking off discussing the real situation on the ground. So they had some decent people involved with it, but they had no hope against the bureaucrats. They brought in these nice, shiny new Nissans with electric windows, radial tires, and no snorkels. Mm-hmm. One of these things didn't have 1,000 miles on it when it tried to ford a stream, and they had to tear the whole engine down. They couldn't repair the tires. They had to get new wheels sent in. What else? Of course, the first Ford you do, those power windows don't work too well after that. So, and there was one place, we told him there was one place that had to have water hauled in. He said, you got to have a water bowser. You're on a water truck. And they had 18 months to sort this out. When they were leaving, we had one that we borrowed, and we had to return it. They said, no, you're not getting this. So some of these guys didn't have water. And their computer system, they had none. And these sector commanders were having to bring their daily sit reps in under these conditions I'm talking about and deliver them to Tilo. This is the kind of stuff the UN did. And it just, if you think of, Big Blue, of back in the day, or General Motors at their most bloated, they have nothing on the UN. At the top level, there are a bunch of thieves sent there. You notice all their headquarters are in the major shopping centers of the world, New York, Geneva, places like this. These people living high on the hog there are doing it, literally starving the people in their home countries, these poor peasants, to maintain their lifestyle in these places. Maybe they could do something. I guess the children's thing is all right, but that can be taken and given to somebody else. And the demining thing they don't do a bad job, honestly, but they could be given to somebody else. And the rest of it, you could scrap it or put their centers, put one of them in the middle of Mali or someplace like that, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, another one of the, the steppes of Russia there, or Central Asia. That's where these people should be, and where they might actually help the local economies by being there. So,
I mean, the inept. When I first realized how bad the UN was, there's numerous examples. But when the Sarajevo and when Mladic was killing people in Bosnia and all of that, and they basically had that camp full of refugees, and that Mladic and all of them rolled up, and they just sat back and literally stood there as they began taking the men, women, and children to kill them. I was like, that pretty much sums up the UN right there.
Yep. I mean, it was a mistake to begin with. It's no problem having people get together and talk. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer in that, but to create an organization such as the UN to do it, to affect it, is just asking for disaster and failure. And you stop and think about it, what have they accomplished in their 75 years of existence?
Nothing since WW2.
Founded in 45.
I mean, nothing. I honestly can't believe, as well as y'all are doing, why I guess since it's international, why their name would have come up into this with y'all doing as well as y'all were.
They took the whole comprehensive peace agreement. We monitored this ceasefire agreement, which the parties involved in the Nuba Mountains had agreed to, and which they wanted. So this was just one small part of it. Now you got Darfur over here and Khartoum up there. So there was a lot in South Sudan and all this. So this comprehensive peace agreement had to be under a bigger body than, a small organization of 30 to 50 people and, 15 or 20 operators. It took a lot more than that. So it had to go to somebody, but unfortunately the somebody was the UN. And you can see the result now. The whole thing's gone to hell in a handcart. The first thing they give you an idea of the ineptitude of these people. You've heard about, the stout Nubian slaves and all that.
Yes.
You temper blades or quench blades by running through a stout Nubian slave. Well, the Nubian slaves came from where we were working, and they hate the Egyptians. They absolutely loathe the Egyptians. And the first thing we did this whole thing unarmed for over 3 years. And first thing they did was brought in a battalion or something of armed Egyptian soldiers.
Oh, God.
So right away, they've got instant hostility, instant antipathy. Nobody wants to do squat for them. So anyway, they're a good study in what not to do.
I was about to say, literally, you could write a thesis on UN and why you should not ever follow anything they do because it's an instant backfire. I mean, just the mere thought of them knowing that this group of people hate Egyptians and the first group they send, I mean, they could have asked y'all, who do you think would blend in or work the best with the local community? Oh, anyone but Egyptians. All right, we'll send Egyptians then.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, some of these people they had Paraguayans and they had troops from Zimbabwe, and a whole bunch of countries had people there. And it's funny. The head of my last job was familiarization and orientation for the incoming. Nick Burrows and I did the familiarization and orientation for the incoming military observers who were going to replace us. And one of the contingents was from Zimbabwe. And so the head of the Zimbabwean contingent was Lieutenant Colonel Emerson and Yamagano. And after kind of walking around each one another like a couple of pit bulls with their hackles up, studying one another out, we became, that was my Zimbabwe days. That was me meeting Abel Muzorewa, who was the prime minister who enjoyed white support. So
you definitely had experience with Zimbabwe men and Zimbabwe as a whole. Then.
Yeah. Well, but anyway, this guy, in the case of the cream rising to the top, quickly became the de facto leader of the entire military observer contingent and sorting all these problems out with the computers and this and that and the other thing. And he and I got pretty friendly. We kind of got a chuckle over the fact that here are two guys who would have killed each other on sight 25 years before. We talked about what areas we worked and all that. And at first I thought he was probably Zipra because they tended to be more professionally trained at the time. And he said, no, he was Zanla. And I said, okay.
Wow.
And we had actually worked the same areas. I said, I probably don't recognize you because I'm not looking through the sights of a rifle. Anyway, we got pretty friendly. We got kind of a chuckle out of the fact two guys would have killed each other on sight 25 years before. We're now in the third country, trying to keep the damn fools there from doing the same thing we've done. So,
just wild.
Yeah. And he invited me to come back, and I told him very nicely, as long as Robert Mugabe was in power, I was not going back to Zimbabwe. He said, I completely understand. So,
wow.
Well, I've never taken him up on. I keep hoping that he'll get posted. If he's still in, he's probably got to be a flying officer now. And I keep hoping that maybe he'll contact me and say he got posted to DC or something, but to the embassy there.
That would be pretty cool. Y'all getting to meet up in DC together.
Yeah. This is like Kipling's thing about Ballad of East and West. Soldiers can get along.
Mm.
And there's no point in hating the other side because they may be your allies. Look at, if you got yourself into a case of hating Germany and loving the Russians because the Russians were our allies in World War II and we were fighting Germans, a couple of years later, the roles had reversed. So, professional soldiers shouldn't hate enemies.
No.
So,
I mean, heck, the Germans built our rocket program, I mean, geez Louise,
I mean, it's just it's pragmatism. I mean, you can't, if you hate somebody, you're not thinking clearly. And you can't kill them properly if you hate them too badly. And the other thing is, completely. If you stay with this long enough, the ones that were your enemies are going to be your allies, and the ones that were your allies may very well be your enemies. So that's not for the soldiers to worry about.
Aptly said. Absolutely. Then there's some great footage coming out now of and of course it's been a few years, but some German soldiers and American men meeting up that were either at the Battle of the Bulge or storming the beaches of Normandy, and them getting together and immediately saying, "I'm sorry," and it was I was just doing my job. I didn't hate Americans and I didn't hate you, and it's just a beautiful thing to see.
Some did.
About
it. And I mean, you get into the SS, they were so conditioned. And but that the Waffen SS were good soldiers wherever they went afterwards. What a lot of people don't realize is that after World War II, a lot of the Waffen SS ended up in the Foreign Legion, and they kept the situation under control in Vietnam, what they call French Indochina, now Vietnam, until the French people and the press found out that all these export criminals were in the Legion, and got rid of them and tried to send the French regular army in, and then it was just a very short spell from then to Dien Bien Phu.
There's a great book on that, and I always forget the name of it. Geez Louise, I can't
Street Without Joy?
Nope. It's like Bad Blood or somebody in the comments will let me know, but it's about the Waffen SS men that
I think I read that when I was in Rhodesia. I think I know the book you want. And the author went to a number of different places. He ended up in South America too. Yeah. Yeah, very good book. Yeah.
It is a very, very good book. And it's a great history lesson because I didn't know before speaking to you that there were Americans and French Foreign Legion at Dien Bien Phu. That was amazing to me. So, I mean, like you said, you just can't hate your enemy because as you never know when it's going to come back around that they're going to be your biggest supporters and helpers. I mean, kind of like Vietnam with our trade now. Who would have ever thought that would have happened?
Yep. And who would have thought that they would be the problem with most of these communist countries is that they got this central government control and their industry never works worth a damn. Now what happened to Russia? I mean, they've really never been able to do what they might have been able to do otherwise. And Vietnam learned that very quickly, that you got to turn people loose to let them be capitalists,
Oh, yeah.
Well, are you familiar with the NEP? Does that term ring a bell?
No, sir.
The NEP was the new economic policy instituted by Lenin in 1922, where they essentially just put communism on the back shelf and reinstituted capitalism because the whole thing was going to collapse if they hadn't. And that's documented. That's not something you got to find some obscure tome to find. Any objective history of the the Russian Revolution will tell you. We'll cover that. 1922 was the NEP, the new economic policy, and was instituted by Vladimir Lenin.
I did not know Lenin did anything associated with capitalism. That's crazy. Wow.
He had to. I mean, particularly with kulaks and all that. I mean, they just weren't they weren't farming anymore. I mean, eventually they got them all. But
I was
at
about
that
to say,
time, in order to survive, he had to do that. They had to revert to capitalism for a while. So.
wow. That's a part of history with him being in Germany and everybody thinks communism was a Russian thing and all of that when Marx was a German and it started in Germany and then the Germans sent Lenin back and thought they were going to create dissension, which it did, but they never thought he'd take over. And sure enough, they created a monster. They ended up fighting in WW2 that was a monster.
Yeah,
it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Did you? I can't remember. Did you mention you actually came across some German soldiers while you were in Africa working with them?
Now let me think on that. I not in Sudan. We had an Austrian Gray Scouts in the fire department. Hubert Markun was Austrian.
Okay.
And you talk about these poor Africans, they are speaking like this, and it's a second language. English is a second language most of them. Now, most of ours were pretty well educated, but even so, Hubert, you sprechen like this, and Bill, Lewis, Sergeant Major Lewis had a Scots burial you couldn't have cut with a knife, and I had to translate for these guys.
Jeez Louise. I always enjoy hearing stories of you guys crossing paths with German guys. My family lived in Germany for a while.
I have to say, I never met any World War II vets or anything like that. But I did meet a few from that part of the world. And I actually spent, when I was coming back, the project wrapped up before I had a full year in. So, so I had to spend a couple of months out of the States, or they would have taken everything I had saved up from this thing, because your first $80,000 of income is tax-free if you're out of the country like that. And they would have taken it all. So we had some friends in Germany, and I stayed there for a couple of months and brushed up on my German and German speaking proficiency and all that. But most of the people, I think most Germans, you might find some pocket, just as you could find people like the Jihad Squad in this country and some of these ultra far right clowns like the ones that showed up at Charlottesville. 230 million, they managed to find a couple hundred of these jerks,
Yeah.
And I imagine there's a few in Germany, but they don't trot them out for visitors, So.
No. I've always wanted. I'm not a big airplane flyer, but I would like to go to Europe to see the WW2 sites and visit Germany and a few. If I could ever work up the nerve, I would love to go to Vietnam, but I'm kind of not feeling the communist minders and all of that following me around.
A lot of the guys have gone back there, and there's nothing for me to go back there. I saw a bit of Saigon. I got sent there TDY for a couple of months when I came back, and I got no interest in seeing Hanoi, maybe Hue. That's the only place. And the place I'd like to go is up to the Central Highlands, and I think it would be such a wrenching experience to find out if I could find those Montagnards who work for me, who are probably, most of them, they don't tend to live that long and all that. And I left there, in 71? That's 53 years ago. So 53 years ago. But what they did to the Montagnards after the war, the ones that couldn't get out, I don't think I'd want to see it. So why go back?
That's what most of the vets have said. And plus, with you being in Khartoum, when they overran it, and I think in 72 or 73, everything you knew would probably be, except for you being able to spot landmarks, FOB2's not there. There's nothing left. I mean, it was burnt to the ground and rocketed and bulldozed. And so, I don't think I can see why you guys wouldn't want to go over there. And I'm about to that thing. I couldn't have a communist minder wanting to take me to sites to see where the VC did this or that.
Right.
I'd be wanting to see where Americans were, where my dad was, where you guys were, and stuff like that. So
And I think going back to what's now Zimbabwe would be a horrible disappointment. I mean, that was you talk about a place that had all the potential for success.
Zimbabwe.
That was Zimbabwe. By the time of independence, the whites who were left were determined to make a go of it, and there was never the antipathy between the black Africans and the white Africans that you saw in South Africa. When I first got to Africa in '76, it was just a month or two before Soweto riots. And just walking down the street in Johannesburg, people just staring straight ahead, with these icy, stares and all that, not speaking, not communicating. And it was not like that at all in Zimbabwe. I tell you, toward the end, now the end was in sight. Mm-hmm. And we got shoes, roughed in shoes from a commercial forging place in Salisbury, in Harare. And so, most of the help there was African, and most of the stuff that catered to the working people there would cater to Africans, not Europeans. And so we got there late one day. We had to go in for something. Billy Lewis and I went in, and I was hungry. And they had all these little carts, these little two-wheel carts that these guys pushed around and were sent out by the bakery, by Lobel's Bakery and all that. And they had, sausage pies and all these things, meat pastries and all that. And it was going to do me until supper time anyway. And I went looking. Well, it was kind of late. They'd all packed up. The only thing I could find was somebody selling these buns with pink icing on them. I said, is there any place around I might get something to eat? They said, maybe in the beer garden. There was this African beer garden there where they drink that muck that they drink there. And so I said, well, me and Mr. Combat Commander can probably get in and get out. Let me go see. The only problem I had there was getting out. They all let me sit down and have a drink with them. I could have spent the afternoon there and been wheeled out later. But
why do you think that was, that it was such a good mix between Europeans?
Because the whites had their roots in the country. The Asians, the South Asians were hated. Mm. I mean, they were the ones that never integrated with the people. They came there, they made their money, and they took what they had, and they left. Mm. And the Africans really hate them. Then the ultimate was, of course, in Uganda, where Idi Amin needed to get some popularity with the Africans, so he threw all the Asians out. Yeah. And they filled the same role that the Chinese fill in the Orient, and that the Jews did in Europe, where they were people with their own language, their own customs, and not quite. They did not have a home. The Jews did not have a homeland they could call their own, early on. Not until Israel was formed post World War II. But the Chinese still, their home in their minds, what a lot of them still today is a village in China somewhere. Mm-hmm. So they're clannish. They're usually successful. They're almost invariably well educated. You think all these groups to succeed, they have to be. Mm-hmm. And so the Asians were not appreciated, and the Americans or the whites had the same interest. I mean, if you were a white kid came off a farm, you were not some privileged dude that sat up there with his feet up on the rail and sipped drinks all day. Yeah. And I remember after the war, I was working for an outfit called Transport and Crane Hire, and we did heavy hauling and crane rental, and I started a rigging division for them. And so they found out after the war, all of a sudden people began to realize this treasure trove they had in some of these Africans and the connections. Some of these Africans were very, in a quiet way, very, very wealthy. And a lot of the guys we had, our drivers and operators and stuff, had a couple of stores and a couple of farms back in the TTL that their wives ran while they were in there making the big bucks in Salisbury. And the Gulliver's was the largest road building, bridge building, dirt moving company in the country. They ran a Wanky Colliery and all that, the coal mines at Wanky. And the senior vice president and one of the Africans left and went out and started their own company. Now, this guy was making, top dollar and all that. And the Africans had the contacts. We had this one guy, Freddie, he'd been a driver, an operator or something. And he was renting out equipment in all these African areas. And they couldn't find a D7, a Cat D7 dozer. So he and I went looking. And we went into this Asian neighborhood. And it looked like something you see in the pictures of the posh neighborhoods in Beverly Hills.
Oh,
I mean, incredibly,
luxurious, just
luxury, yeah. And he went on a Sergeant Benny. He went on a roll. He said, "Look at these people." He said, "They do not care. They just take from us, and they live in luxury, and then they go home. They go back to where they came from." He said, "These Europeans," he said, "I have seen these young whites in the fields, with the skin burnt off of their face, working alongside the black Africans." So that there was never that kind of animosity in Rhodesia, or very minimal. And any people who were racist were gone by independence for the most part.
That's what's I've always, and I continually get it today. It's still going on by the I hate that term, but it's so overused now. But by the woke people that are just now finding about Rhodesia and all of that it was a white supremacist led government. It was this, it was that. Oh, they were killing blacks just to go to war with blacks. And I was like,
yeah,
if
nothing else they say if nothing else they say makes any sense, why would you think their opinion on some place had never been about a war that happened 40 years ago would make any sense either? Exactly. But no, it was, I tell you, they made more steps toward equality, equity, whatever the hell you want to call it, in a matter of a few years than the United States made in 150 following the Civil War.
Wow.
I mean, change came in a hurry there. And it could have worked. That's the sad thing. It could have worked. The Africans were being, you cannot snap your fingers and say you're an engineer. Somebody's got to be trained to be an engineer. And one of the first things that the communists did when the war started, first thing they did was they shut down the dips, where they dip the cattle, the livestock for ticks. And the other thing was they closed down all the schools in the TTL. So you have a whole generation of black Africans in Zimbabwe who grew up illiterate, not through anything the whites did, because they wanted educated Africans. All these farms had their own schools so that the kids would learn, because it's obvious you needed to, it's gone beyond where somebody just operated a hoe or something like that, chopping weeds out in the field. You needed educated people. And our drivers, one of the guys who worked with me when I started the rigging thing, he'd been a lorry mate. And Nambo was he speaking very slowly like this. But he spoke very slowly like that in 5 different languages.
Wow.
Fluently, yeah. So, and this is, people got no clue as to what happened there. You can make a case for the apartheid in South Africa, that it was not a good thing. But that was not the case for the last half, 3/4 of a century in Rhodesia. I mean, the change was coming. When I got there in 1976, the first thing they said, if you're some detribalized Klansman looking for the last vestige of white supremacy, you come to the wrong place. You might as well get on the next plane out and go someplace else, because we have accepted, and this was before it actually happened, we have accepted that black rule is coming. is now we're not fighting against black rule. We're fighting for what kind of black rule it is, whether it's going to be communist or capitalist. And, so that's the reality.
Yeah, I've heard from another Rhodesia vet that, you know, the soldier of fortune mercenary crowds coming down there, and a few of them would be, you know, not recruiting, but, you know, kind of talking about the Klan and all of that. And as soon as they heard that, they were like, pack your bags, you're getting out of
Yep.
here. You're not staying here.
Yeah, they did not need any of that.
Yeah, that's why I'm vehemently always in the comments trying to set things straight. It's ridiculous. So, but like you said, you know, what can you expect from someone that gets everything wrong and has never left the United States, much left their city? So, you know,
Even when they go places, they're hand carried around by government officials, or they're on a tour. They don't get out and rub shoulders with the people. They don't get out on the land. I mean, when I dealt with lions and stuff like that and elephants, it wasn't in a armored or protected safari vehicle. It was walking.
Could have reached out and touched them. They were so close.
Exactly. Yeah.
God, you have lived.
It's almost literal. The Salute Scout selection I did, we started out with 100 or 105 African soldiers and 5 Europeans. We passed out 2 Europeans and 15 African soldiers. And I was in the Grays. That was shortly after I came there, and shortly before I went to did the Salute Scout selection. That's on they used Gray Scouts pack animals to string wire on a cordon sanitaire on the at the eastern border near Umtali, right in just north of Umtali. And I was up there checking on our livestock there. So
it's a great photo.
Anyway, but where were we? Before we got off on that. So anyway, we split up at the end for at the very end there, and there were about 2 groups. There were probably about 18 or 20 African soldiers left, and Dave Hodgson, who's a corporal in SAS, and I were the Europeans left. So I got one bunch, and he got the other bunch, and they were there, and he was about to lean his rifle up against a rock when his ear twitched. It was a sleeping rhino. And we carried, they loaded our rucksacks with stones, and they hung them, from a scale. You had to have 75 pounds. And they painted the rocks with a different color paint every time, so you couldn't buy a can of paint, and paint some rocks when you came back that looked to be the same size. And you got weighed in and weighed out and weighed in when you came back in. Anyway, he made the sign as a sign, you do this and indicate a game. And he did this, and he started sneak back, tippy-toeing back like Wile E. Coyote. And one of the African soldiers saw it and hollered, and it woke this thing up. There were 3 or 4 more, 2 or 3 more anyway in there. And they started doing cloverleaf patterns through there. And with 75-pound rucks in their weapons, shimmying up trees.
Holy cow!
Yeah,
that was right. I mean, Vietnam was bad, but some of those African animals, I mean, you're just trading one bad place for another animal wise. I mean, you guys were brave, not only doing the military side, but
there was in Vietnam the only place where there was one area in the 4th Division covered it where they had a problem with tigers. And everything else, all the other game would move out when the military moved in, but the tigers didn't. And they were actually, I heard, having the Lerps, 4th Division Lerps were having guys pulled out of their RON positions by tigers. And there was apparently, I was told there was a ward or a bay anyway in the 91st Evac dedicated to tiger injuries. So, but there were a lot more of them in Africa, trust me. And we encountered a lot more of them But when I got to Sudan, now there are 3 snakes in Africa that are aggressive. One of them's the Egyptian cobra. One of them's the the viper, puff adder, and the other is the mamba, which can be. We had them all. And in the cold season, the guys go out at last light and they'd rake all the sand in the compound, and then look for snake tracks the next morning because they get into the buildings, mostly cobras and all that. And I didn't necessarily agree with the general attitude, was that the only good snake was a dead snake, whatever persuasion. So, but I always, if I went for a hike or something, I went for a walk, I carried a stick with me, a good walking stick, like 5 foot long. And I figured you don't know sometimes when you're in between a mamba and where it wants to go. And they're just kind of excitable snakes. And these things get up to 14 feet long. They can go at 12 miles an hour with a third of that up in the air. So, and when they hit you, they don't hit you once. So they're not something you want to mess with.
That or the king cobra. I'd want no part of either one of those snakes.
Well, the spitting cobras are bad. They because they hit you in the eyes and all that. God. And the worst ones are the soft scale vipers for people killed, because they don't move. We didn't have any in that area, but they're not that they're necessarily belligerent, but they don't move either. Now, if you come up on one, he'll nail you. And they kill, I think, more indigenous people than any other species. So, anyway.
Wow.
We got way off of the JMC.
Yeah, it's
but
fine.
Anyway, the main thing to take away from it is a small organization, effectively led, could accomplish an incredible amount of good. And the bigger the organization, the less it's going to accomplish. So, and there's a tipping point where you go from the small organization can do more good to the big organization is going to go over the edge and start doing more and more bad, just to accommodate the needs of the bureaucracy. So,
Roger that. And I've got some. Actually, found a good website. What's the name of this that you're mentioning with some of your photos? Thorn Apple.
Email that to me, please, because I'd like to have it, because I have lost track of some of that stuff, and I really want it for my book.
It's got all of your sit reps in it. Everything you ever wrote is on there, along with a ton of photos. So yeah, I will, as soon as we get off here, I'll send that to you. I'm sure people, because we've had a few African viewers join us, and we're interested in you talking about Rhodesia. I'm sure they're glad you spoke about it a little bit, but we may have to have you come back on and just shoot the bull with us and talk your career with us.
Reality of life, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we'll have to set up a time to have you back. Is there? I didn't mean to cut us off. Oh wow, we've already hit an hour and a half here. Was there?
I haven't had lunch yet either.
Was there anything else that you wanted to cover before next time?
I'm always happy to come back and talk about this stuff, but the next week is we'll have to talk. I'll give you a call or something, or we'll contact one another and talk about it. I got to look at my calendar and all that, and I'm sure you do too. So, all right, but yeah. And we can talk about anything you want, but please send me that link or whatever it is, so I can get in there. Because there's one of those one of the best things I ever wrote, I think, was the one I did around Christmas, when we're the village of Angola, which was a big village. I mean, villages aren't always these little; they're where people get together essentially, and this thing was about 12,000 people. They had a couple of pitcher pumps for this whole bunch of people, and the rains had come at the wrong time. They got a bad start on the grain. Uh, then the rains came and knocked most of it down. What survived that, some kind of birds came in and got it, and they were facing starvation. And this was right before Christmas. And they said, geez, what can we do for you? And all they asked for, they wanted a comprehensive peace agreement. They wanted maybe, I think, another pump or two for the wells, and they wanted better schooling for the kids. And I was thinking, here you got Americans, loaded up with all these luxury toys and all this. Here are these people with their backs against the wall, and these are the things they ask for. And I was really moved by it. So,
wow, amazing people. I mean, I thought you slipped up and said you were working on a book, and I sure as hell hope you are working on a book, because you've got a life story that you've shared a lot with us. But I know there's a lot more in your memory bank that needs to be put to paper for posterity's sake. So I hope you are writing a book.
Yeah, people keep telling me that, and so I guess so. But,
yes.
if people listen to you when you're talking, I guess you got something going for you. But anyway.
Oh,
so
your
book. One of the things if you look at all these books about Vietnam or Rhodesia, they're all very much snapshots in time, more concerned with looking through the reverse end of a telescope at the units in which these people served and what they did. And nobody ever draws any conclusions. Now, I've been in 2 wars in this peacekeeping operation, and also been at 2 calf ropings and a county fair, so I really got it all figured out. But I've come to some thoughts on the whole thing, on war and all this, and so I want to get those in there too.
That I would love to hear your thoughts, and even more. I mean, you've shared a lot of your thoughts with us on all of these interviews, but putting it to paper, I would absolutely love to see that. And I know everybody that's been watching all of your interviews is sure as hell would love to read your bio. So heck, I'm glad we got a little breaking news here for the SOG community that you're in the works for getting that on paper. So yeah, you check. I just emailed you the link to your to the webpage. Hopefully it came through. If it didn't, I'll resend it. But you can check your schedule and let me know when you're looking good for the rest of the month, or whenever you get free time, and we'll love to have you back on.
Just while I'm looking at the schedule before I get back, think about what you might want to talk about so I can prep a little bit.
I'll ask some of the folks in the show notes and on Twitter what they'd like to hear. I'm sure Rhodesia is going to come up because we don't get enough Rhodesia information. So I know some of the African viewers are going to want to hear about it because they were already saying enjoyed hearing you talk about it. So I know that'll be on the schedule, and we'll get a few more things pinned out. But you just get with me whenever you get free time after you check your schedule, and we'll go from there.
Okay, excellent.
All righty, guys. Yes, sir. Everyone says thank you, and they're hoping you do a part 4, and wishing you a nice weekend. And same to all of y'all. And I guess we're going to shut down for the day.
Okay. Well, you take care then. Thank you.
Yes, sir. See y'all later.